Another thing to point out is that the international community's collective action problems aren't just in enforcing compliance, as I was talking about a moment ago, but they also go to the challenge of finding violations to exist in the first place. It has been, in the IAEA context, for example, extraordinarily difficult to muster sufficient diplomatic support to find Iran in violation of nuclear safeguards, even when it's been incredibly well documented by the IAEA Director General and the Inspectorate themselves. And apart from the US, for example, which governments, and this is actually a question because I don't think I know the answer, maybe Australia, which governments have to this day ever publicly said that Iran violated Article 2 of the NPT by trying to develop nuclear weapons? You will search remarkably long before you find a lot of discourse on that, which is a little strange under the circumstances, if you would ask me. And I have to say, this is also a place where we in the US fell short for quite a while. I think our own record of candor in compliance assessment vis-a-vis Iran has been mixed. If you do some homework, you'll find out that way back in 1991 was the first point at which the US Arms Control and Disarmament Agency, which is the sort of the predecessor to the chunk of the State Department that I had the honor to briefly run, ACTA, as it was called, first publicly assessed that Iran was seeking nuclear weapons back in 91. But when did we actually declare Iran to be in violation of Article 2 of the NPT, which of course bars trying to get nuclear weapons? That was 2005,
Yeah.
some 14 years later.
I got to interject. That was no accident. There were a bunch of brickbats over at the Defense Department pushing that. I know because I was one of them.
Oh, in 2005, there was blood all over the walls of the State Department.
No, but in 91.
Oh, the first one you mean? Excuse me. Yes.
Yeah, in 91, we were exporting nuclear goods to Iran. The United States was.
Quite striking.
Yeah. Well, I think I gave a paper on how many ways we helped the program all the way through to when we finally began to put pressure on them. It was about a decade of happy-go-lucky, I don't see a problem, let's ship it.
Yeah, we have a lot to not be proud of. And, you know, and even by 2005, it took a massive fight inside state, led by John Bolton, who was the Undersecretary for Arms Control and International Security, by Assistant Secretary Paula de Sutter, by myself. We spent a lot of time on this, and it was shockingly hard. So our record's not great in being really honest about these things too. So we should not pretend that this is just a collective action problem for the international community. It is, but we have our own challenges in this respect, and our record is not always one that we should be very proud of. There's also the problem of what I call asymmetric impact. Specifically, it's kind of a challenge for the non-proliferation regime that its mechanisms for identifying and for remedying safeguards problems are ones that are much more effective in dealing with countries that are already relatively open to and cooperative with the international community than these processes are in dealing with nuclear malfeasance by nasty, reclusive, and dangerous dictatorships. A couple of examples. South Korea was discovered in 2004 to have been engaged in undeclared experiments with fissile material, which, you know, pretty clearly a violation of its safeguards obligations. The disclosure of this alone was enough to prompt Seoul to conduct a fairly embarrassed retreat. And similarly, a year later, in 2005 or so, Egypt was also discovered to have failed to report some experiments as it was required to do. But as far as I could tell, that revelation alone also resulted in the embarrassed suspension of the activity in question. And that's good. And in neither case did the IAEA actually call out a violation. But in comparison to Iran, and especially to North Korea, you know, it's a pretty striking difference, right? I mean, it's granted, the NPT is not the first set of rules in this complicated world that tends to restrain the good citizen more than it constrains the you know, nasty criminal. And that's not a reason not to have rules, but it's a problem nonetheless, and we should be aware that this is a challenge for the regime.